It is Wednesday, my dudes, and so that brings us once again back to Velocity Lake, episode 12, but part 2 of 3 for the construction. What an intro! For the construction of this B&M sit-down coaster, which we started last episode. So if you haven't seen it, there is a link to the full playlist in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and get yourself caught up on not only this build but the rest of the series if you haven't done so already. If you want, I'm not gonna push you. There's no police around. I ain't gonna snitch. I ain't no snitch. So do what you want. It's your life, guys. Live it to the fullest. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. We have to gamers. We gotta rise up. We are the most oppressed demographic. I think we can all agree. We've got to stick together on this. Anyway, in this episode, we're going to be, like I said, working on completing the B&M sit-down coaster, which, if you haven't seen the previous episode and have no intention of watching it, I'll just quickly summarize what it was. It's basically very heavily inspired by the Hulk coaster at Universal Studios Orlando, if it wasn't obvious from that Drive Tire Tunnel launch. But obviously after the launch, and even immediately following the launch, because it's not a zero-G roll, it's like a dive loop. For the rest of the layout, it's not very Hulk-inspired. But that's going to change a little bit today. We are going to make it slightly more similar to the Hulk, because I decided I wasn't really a big fan of the final part of the track, specifically after the mid-course brake run. I wasn't particularly happy with that layout. So I thought, let's go ahead and amend that. And I thought I'd take some inspiration from the Incredible Hulk layout. The Incredible Hulk layout has this small vertical loop, and then the mid-course brake run goes kind of through the vertical loop. That's all I had in mind. I wanted to have a loop and then a mid-course brake run through the loop. That's kind of how I entered this phase of the build, and then everything else I was just kind of winging it, really. I mean, I know it's kind of like looks down upon in the pro Planet Coaster community to use the prefabricated pieces, but I think they're really good. At least, I will build a ride in this part. There's lots of inversions, but no prefab pieces. But I did build a skeleton of the ride first, just using the prefabs, just so I could get a sense of how the layout would look and how much space, what the footprint of the ride would be. So I think they're really good for that point of view. But also, they are smooth. It's very difficult to make pieces yourself, even with the 4-meter smoothing technique and the autocomplete technique. Even then, it is still very hard to make pieces as smooth as the prefabricated pieces. I think their only negative, it's quite a big one. Their main negative is that the transitions between prefabricated pieces can often be a little bit jerky. It's fairly smooth and it suddenly sort of jolts as it goes back to player-created track, and then it's smooth again once you enter the next piece. But, you can design coasters to try and mitigate this as much as possible. And I think this ride is pretty smooth. There's one kind of rough bit, but it's the, you can't see it, but it's the big overbanked turn over the cliff. That bit, just that. So you saw it just before the mid-course brake run. A little bit of janky connection between the two corkscrew pieces, but I think it's a very minor point, honestly. And I think it's more of an issue with Planet Coaster's camera movement rather than the actual smoothness of the ride. So here's a little POV of it going just here. I'm just going to play it at fast motion because we've already seen the POV. You know what it is. And obviously, I'll show the real speed POV once we've actually got a bit more work on the coaster itself done. But that is pretty much the final layout of this ride. So now we've finished the layout. We're going to be spending the rest of the episode basically, well, I guess we're doing some fine-tuning here. But for the most part, the rest of this episode is going to be spent building the station, pretty much finishing the station and transfer track. And that's what we're doing in this episode. Now, unfortunately, Shadowplay did an oopsie. For those who don't know, I record these videos using Shadowplay, and occasionally, I don't know why, the data gets corrupted and the video file is unusable. It's really frustrating because the video file is there, and this was a portion of this build that involved building the actual station and transfer track, so quite substantial pieces of the build. Unfortunately, it resulted in about an hour and a half's worth of footage, about 50 gigabytes worth of data, and I had the file. It had no thumbnail in Windows Explorer, but sometimes Windows Explorer is a bit rubbish like that. And it said, this is a 50 gigabyte file, and it showed the length, and it showed the time and everything, and it showed the format. But opening it using any program, even VLC, Sony Vegas, Windows Media Player, I tried. And there's another one I use as well. It's a program called Any Video Converter that can just convert any video file, and that is often even better at playing obscure files than even VLC. and even that couldn't play it. So I guess it's just completely unsalvageable, unfortunately. So there will be, I'll point it out when it happens, but there is a point in this video where suddenly a building appears, and it's quite an intricate building at that, and there's no real, you don't get to see it get constructed. That's why. Unfortunately, some of the footage did get corrupted. Hopefully this won't be a recurring theme in this series. It hasn't happened thus far in this series, and hopefully it won't happen again. One can hope. So, just doing a little bit of landscaping just to make sure that not only does the car not hit the ground, that would not be an ideal scenario, but also I want to ultimately fence off the perimeter of this ride just to stop people wandering into the track. You know, you read, there are stories of people wandering into the track to get their cell phones, and the next thing you know, they're decapitated. I never understood that. You know, I was actually on a, you know, when you go on the Wikipedia rabbit hole, I think I was reading about that new roller coaster. What's it called? Steel Curtain. So excited for that, even though I'll probably never get to ride it because I don't live anywhere near that country, near that continent, honestly. But I was just reading up about it, and then just you end up clicking on various Wikipedia links, and you read about, it tends to be B&M inverts. So I guess B&M, the theme of this video, because it's B&M coaster, but this is B&M inverts. You know, your Black Mambas, your Nemesises, your Afterburners, you know, those rides. And there's one where, there's two, I think they were both called Raptor actually, but don't quote me on that, don't at me, where people would like lose their hats or cell phones, and so their first instinct would not be to notify the ride operator, but to just wander into the confines of the track. And then the car comes along and kills them. And I just think, like, why would you risk your life walking into the path of a fast-moving train just to retrieve a phone or a hat, something as benign as that? By the way, here we are, fast-forwarded to the corrupted footage has now sort of passed. So I tell you what, we can probably pause it here, and I'll do a... No, I can't do an overview, I've just realised, because the rest of the building is already finished. Oh well, I guess you can kind of just see those. So I've just basically made the whole thing out of smooth concrete, then just used the sci-fi pieces to form like a little sort of greebling over the wall, and then the transfer track is there. I mean, it's not really any different to my previous transfer tracks for these sit-down coasters, so hopefully you don't feel too deprived of high quality content. And then the transfer track itself is just another B&M sit-down coaster. I can't remember what it's called in this game. Is it Fury, possibly? After Fury 325, or I'm not sure. I know the stock, like, because when when Frontier adds coasters to this game, they always create like a prefab layout that you can just plop down in your park if you don't want to make your own layout. And looking at the one that came with this ride, it's a near carbon copy of the Incredible Hulk coaster, so you can tell that's definitely what they were going for. But I don't know if, because 325 isn't even a, I guess it's a B&M sit down, but it's B&M. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm talking about half the time, guys. Just ignore me. So I've got these like round entrances to the building, but the building itself can only be made from square pieces. So I'm kind of masking the imperfections of the ride, of the building, I should say, using these sort of ventilation tubing. Looks all nice and sci-fi, so works well with this ride, I think. Now, yeah, I was going on, and then I went on a tangent again. But yeah, the whole thing is built out of smooth concrete with just the sci-fi pieces clad onto the sides. Here's a little shot of the transfer track, so you can see that there's nothing really to write home about inside there. Now, worry not, because you will still kind of see the methodology that went into building the interior of the station, because the queue line for this ride is also going to be indoors, and obviously it's going to be the same sci-fi theme that the station was. So you'll still see kind of the techniques I used to build the interior of the station. It's just that you won't get to see the construction of the interior of the station itself, which is a shame, because I think it was probably a little bit more detailed, like little things like the red and black caution stripes on the sides of the track, and the red light. I don't know, there wasn't really that much, I guess. Yeah, so obviously it looks a bit dumb at the moment. The tunnel is unsupported, and I thought we'd go for a nice sort of themed look to the support. And it's actually, I've already used this technique for supporting these launch tunnels before in the Crimson Tower roller coaster that had a launch tunnel. I used the same sort of technique where we used these big sci-fi spaceship parts to create some sci-fi-esque looking supports to hold the track up. And there it is there. So a little bit unsupported still. The actual real life Incredible Hulk coaster does have like fantasy looking supports, but it also has just regular roller coaster supports as well to hold up the actual peak of the hill. So I'll be using like a regular support here just because it's a little bit easier than trying to theme a sci-fi one. And, you know, I think at a certain point to this scale, when I feel like if this was themed as well, it would kind of look a bit weird and out of place compared to the rest of the sci-fi canon. So I thought it would probably look a little bit better just having a more understated support that's not going to draw your eye away from the structure of the cannon itself. So it kind of is the best of both worlds, really. It looks better, I think, in my opinion, and it's a bit more similar to this ride's semi-inspiration. I say semi-inspiration because, again, after the first bit, it's very dissimilar to the Hulk at Islands of Adventure. But of course, then again, it wouldn't exist without that ride. So it's kind of hand in hand, really. I don't know if I should call it inspired by it or not. It was at least, capturing the excitement of the Drive Tire launch hill. I feel like I've not really talked about anything in this commentary of value. I feel like at this point in last commentary, I talked about my adventures in Orlando, and that's probably it, actually. But that was something. I feel like this episode I've just rambled, and that's been it. So, what's happened this week? Let's think. It is 10:30 in the morning, and I'm about to go and pick up a parcel from the Royal Mail depot. Basically, I'm recording this as soon as I got up, and then I can go out, run some errands, and then come back, and then hopefully the video will be rendered, and I can start uploading it. And because these videos take a long time to render, like 2 hours up to render, because I use color correction to make the videos look nice. So I sharpen the image, bump up the brightness and the saturation, so that takes a little bit of extra time to encode for Sony Vegas. And also the fact that these are played back at almost 12 times normal speed, and given that they're very high, they're large file sizes, like I said, the file that I got that was lost was like an hour and a half, and that was 50 gigabytes. And, the actual total footage of this is way more than that. So big files that were 1440p, huge file sizes, and you're speeding it up this much, and you're doing all that color correction, it means that these videos take a very long time to render, much longer to render than KSP videos. Even though KSP videos as well are, color corrected and sped up, they're not sped up to quite this extent. It would be somewhat of a nauseating experience to watch KSP videos back at this speed, I suppose. So yeah, just finishing off the entrances here. The actual hole that I'd created using the building pieces was not quite satisfactory in terms of the size, so I just closed it off using the custom coaster supports as structural pieces. And then, a smooth concrete ceiling would probably look a little bit plain, especially a definite juxtaposition to the futuristic look of the interior. So I just added a little metal mesh over the top to add a little bit of extra layering. More is more in Planet Coaster. Always use a little bit of greebling to make things look a bit nicer. Now, even though those sci-fi lights are crap, is it a glitch? They just don't provide any light whatsoever. So I've added those, I think they're from the Studios pack, that ray of lights, just to create some actual natural lighting, but still an ultimately dim lighting experience for the interior of the station. And that's that. But yeah, I guess I've been talking about it, but never really addressed it directly. That the theme of this ride, I went for kind of a sci-fi, like an experiment gone wrong, I suppose. Although I think this was probably unintentional. I can't remember exactly what my thought process was at the time. I guess is kind of the Incredible Hulk. I mean, his whole backstory is an experiment that went wrong. But this is more like a sort of a futuristic sci-fi testing facility. So it's fairly kind of. It's not too over-themed, like it is just ultimately a smooth concrete building, fairly unsupposing. Is that the word? Unassuming. But the actual inside theming, very sort of clinical, stereotypical sci-fi look. So that's the theme I went for. I don't think it's the only sci-fi. It might be. Yeah, I think it might be. The rides near it, the next roller coaster we build is just generic theming. And the roller coaster after that is like an industrial theme. So this is, at the moment, the only sci-fi coaster in the park. One thing I am toying with, actually, for episode 14, and I would actually like to hear your thoughts on this. I might mention this again at the beginning of episode 13, because a lot of people, when I look at my YouTube retention rate for watching these videos, most people have clicked off by now statistically. So I might mention it towards the beginning of the video next time. But I built another roller coaster that was inspired by the Smiler coaster, and I spent a long time, working on it. Like it was finished. There was no theming or station for it, but the actual track itself was done. And then I decided I didn't like it and deleted it. But it was a shame because there was hours and hours of footage there, and I didn't know if people maybe would want that as like a bonus episode. I'll see what the content of next episode is, to be honest, actually, because if it were just building like a cafe or something and that's it, then it might be worth me just sticking the time lapse for the coaster on at the end. I'll have to see, because I'm pretty sure next episode we build another roller coaster, so won't really apply. As in episode 14, not episode 13. Episode 13 we're building this roller coaster. So But would you want to see that? Because I know it might be cool to watch and see the POV of, but ultimately it contributes nothing to this series because it's not actually going to stay in the park for good. That being said, I did save the blueprint, so if I did end up finding a good place for the ride, I can just quickly plop it back down, and then when it came to showing the time-lapse, I can just show the construction of it at an earlier point, and then just... But the thing is, I don't know if I'm going to add it to the park, so if I should just show the time-lapse now, or just withhold it forever, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess because it's not actually part of the actual park itself, there's no real, deadline for me to put it in this series, so I could stick it in wherever. So maybe, actually... I've reached this conclusion all by myself. Maybe actually I'll just wait for an episode where there's not much happening. Like it's just like last episode or episode 10, where we're just building a restaurant and that's it. And nothing else really happened. Maybe I could just add it to the end of an episode like that. I don't know what I'm saying really, but that's just an internal conflict I've been having when it comes to planning the future episodes for this. Do I include that as a bonus episode, even though it's not going to be there to stay? Anyway, there's the roof there. I couldn't really find a good roof from the actual roof pieces that I liked. So I went with these sort of cargo bay pieces that the sci-fi, not just a sci-fi pack, but, the sci-fi theme set has. I'm not sure if I like how it came out, but I think it looks pretty good, like pretty sci-fi-esque. Like you can imagine the black parts in between the railings are like they can slide up to open the windows fully. Who knows? Whatever headcanon you want to go with, we'll go with that. Now, the one thing I think I probably would change about the interior of the queue line here is that the fences themselves are pretty generic. They don't really match the sci-fi theme, and the sci-fi theme itself actually has some pretty cool fences that I don't ever really tend to use because they are a bit excessive to just have out in the open. They do look a bit too much like movie props, but for the heavy theming inside a station building, so they're indoors, might work a little bit better. So I may well go back and change that. I feel like now I'm saying this out loud, I feel like most of the episodes I've at some point said, I may go back and change everything about this. And I feel like at this point I may as well just raise the entire park to the ground and start again the amount of times I said I may go back and change this. But I feel like the fences themselves, what I might do is just do a live stream. Once the park is done, I might do a live stream and just where we go back and fix everything. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I can't really do a live stream realistically because I build this series so far in advance. Like this park... I think this part you're watching now was built in either February or March, and I'm recording the commentary in June, and it's probably not going to go up until July or August, so it's going to be very hard to coordinate because obviously everything you see was built way in the past. So that's a bit of a problem for this series when it comes to showing updates. So this is, I've just zoomed out and we've still got quite a while to go. This is the longest episode in this trilogy within the Velocity Lake series. So I hope it was worth it. I hope you enjoyed it. That's basically the entire station building there. I think we're going to be doing the greebling for the interior of the station queue next episode. So you've got that to look forward to. And obviously we're not only going to do that because I couldn't really dedicate an entire video to just the interior walls of a building. We're building like the surrounding area. Like there's going to be some more rides in this area of the park. And they're all going to be kind of themed to the same sort of sci-fi / generic theming. Like the theming for this ride is not too overt. Like you can fit in with a generic theme and just have a solitary themed ride within an otherwise generic area. But we will be building flat rides around it nonetheless, and flat rides are much quicker to build than roller coasters, obviously. So we can easily fit multiple flat rides into one episode. So that's going to be next episode, just the greenery around this ride, some of the pathways, plazas, flat rides, and fencing, curbing, that sort of thing is going to be the final episode of this series. And of course, like I said, the interior of this station building. But you can see me just finishing off the exterior here. I thought about having a similarly complex exterior wall to like the inside, to have the entire thing clad in the sci-fi paneling, but I thought it might look a little bit naff. Like I think at a certain point, if you have way too much scenery on a building, it just looks a bit naff. And very clearly, like you didn't really know what you were doing, and so you just covered it in crap in the hopes that it would make it look better. So, but let me know what you think. If you don't like it, I probably won't change it regardless of people's opinions. So, yeah, let's go back. As you can see, I've dropped it down to not regular speed, but not quite so fast, just so you can get a nice little overview of what we have achieved at this episode. At this point, I was deciding whether or not we should have some different colors for the paths, just to see if we could have any kind of... Sometimes variability... What I'm trying to say is that sometimes variability in path color and path style often looks pretty nice and pretty cool. So I toyed around with that, but I think ultimately I was happy with just leaving it as crazy paving. So I'll tell you what, we'll put a POV up here now. I think I may have said that I wouldn't put a POV on this episode. I can't remember. I feel like I internally thought it, but you know what? By golly, we're going to show one anyway. So enjoy the POV. There's no sound, hence why I'm still talking, because I think I was still listening to our podcast. Like I said, the final POV will obviously be in the completed bit. It will be completed, the ride, but that will have sound as well. So you will hear this ride in all its thunderous glory, just not today. So yeah, like I said, this is the final layout for this ride, so I hope you enjoy it. There's the mid-course brake run there. We will obviously need to do some custom supports. I don't think I mentioned that when we're talking about the third part of this build next episode. So we're doing some custom supporting, because obviously the concrete, the supports at the moment go inside the water, and realistically they'd be sitting on concrete footers above the waterline, so we'll be placing those as well as proper infrastructure for that mid-course brake run. Here we are on the final turn towards the station building, so I guess we can wrap up the main corridor. Oh, there's a little shot of the transfer track, and then we can cut to the end screen. So on the left is a link to the full playlist if you want to check out some more episodes from this series. The one on the right was chosen for you by YouTube's selection algorithm based on your viewing habits. Discord, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, merch are all in the description, and subscribe and Patreon are on screen as well. I hope you enjoyed this video, my dudes, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.